Look at this beautiful trout.
Bingo. There we go.
Yeah, baby.
All right, well, welcome back to another episode of Dances with Trout. Today, as promised in a previous video, I'm going to go over my process for powder painting my beads, my bead heads, any of my bead heads really that are not pre-colored. So a lot of them come from the factory. They already have a color. There's 1,001 different colors of the Pro-Tec powder paints, and I do like the customization features. So in this video, I'm going to go ahead and show you how to turn something like this, which is a standard 3.8 millimeter tungsten bead head, and we'll go ahead and we'll turn it into something with a little more color. So we'll get started. Okay, so as always, the first thing you're going to want to do is select your bead head that you're going to use. Now you can use this with slotted tungsten bead heads, brass bead heads, non-slotted, any type of bead head this should work for. I should also say that I originally started using this process with regular jig hooks when I was spin fishing. Now that I do primarily fly fishing, it's now going to be a lot of jig hooks like you see here. So I've got a slotted 3.8 millimeter tungsten bead head, and I also have paired it up with a size 12 Nymph Master hook. So today is really just going to be about demonstration. I'm not actually going to make a fly. I'm just showing you guys how to recreate this process. It's something that's fairly easy. It just takes a few pieces of equipment at home. We'll go over that. But pretty much anybody can do this as long as you have access to some Pro-Tec powder paint. So I've got several of these at home. I have different colors, a lot of colors that I continuously use. Like for instance, this is a sapphire blue. I use that a lot. I use the candy gold a lot. And of course, I'm going to be using the standard blacks, whites, hot pinks, things like that, chartreuse. So different colors. But I'll show you guys how to go ahead and coat that shortly. So there's a couple things that we need to make sure of before we get ready to coat this with any type of powder paint, and that is there's two really big steps. One is we need to secure this bead head from moving around. So obviously we don't want this moving all around while we're trying to paint it. So I'll show you what we need to do here in just a second. The other thing we need to do is we need to cover the eye of the hook here. We need to cover that somehow. Obviously, if we dip this into the powder paint when it's hot, if you know how powder paints work, that eye is going to set it's basically going to fill. So we don't want that. Obviously, we want to be able to put our line and our tippet through there, so without any product blocking it. So I'm going to show you how to do that here. Very first thing we're going to want to do is secure the bead head. Now this is going to be, there's many different ways to do it. What I found that works really, really well is using your standard lead, non-lead wire, depending on the size of your hook. So in this case, I have a size 12 hook. I'm going to be using 2/100 lead wire. So just going to go grab some put it onto the hook shank right there and make several thread wraps forward. The idea behind this is you're just going to be securing the bead head. This is not really for weight, although that does kind of help. So I'm just helicoptering this off. Now, I used to, initially I used to use super glue, and I would go ahead and super glue these the night before, 24 hours in advance before I did any of this work. And I've come to find that is somewhat laborious and not really necessary. What I'm showing you here is just a little bit easier, unless you like that preparation. So if you want to go ahead and prepare 24 hours in advance, it does secure the hook very nicely, or the bead head very nicely. You can use some super glue. You can also use some UV resin. That's the idea here, is we're just trying to get this so that it gets in there and holds the bead head from moving around quite like it was before. So as you can see, it's holding in there much better. What you'll see here shortly is we are going to be superheating this bead head, not with a flame, but with a heat gun. So I'm going to show you the process. This process does involve a heat gun. So if you don't have one, or you don't have access to one, you probably do want it. Or you could just use a heat source like an alcohol lamp. You can use something like that. I would not recommend ever heating any Pro-Tec paints with like a Bic or an open flame like this. Unfortunately, that will cause some carbonization in the shell, and that's going to cause some weird colors. You don't really want that. It doesn't look good. You'll know. Trust me, just don't do it. You're going to want to use an open heat source like a heat gun, something that's going to get really hot. Now we need to go ahead, and the eye needs to be covered with something. We need to put something over it, essentially, before we begin this next process, because if we don't, we are going to have basically a bead head that is going to have an eye that is covered. This is basically just some standard tubing. So this is heat shrink tubing. Okay, so the sizing that I'm using for this is 1 by 45 millimeter. So 1 inch by 45 millimeter. And what I do is I take the heat shrink tubing and I just cut it up into small little pieces, using our fly tie, our sharp scissors here. And I just chop it up, make a bunch of small little ones to about this size that you see here. The shrink tubing is going to shrink around the eyelet, thus covering it before you give this thing a nice dip in its powder paint. So I'm going to go ahead. I've cut up several. I put one on the eyelet right now, as you can see there, and it's just covering the eyelet. That's its whole purpose. Right now it's loose, and this is probably the most tricky part of really the whole process, is getting everything set up here for what you're about to do. You have to make sure that this the little heat shrink tubing stays on there during the heat gun. The heat gun blows air, which makes it a little interesting. So blowing air on something this light, they'll just fly right off if you put them right down in front of the burner. So I'm going to go ahead and swing my camera around here and then show you guys what this looks like at the heat gun.
Okay, so here you have a standard heat gun. This one has 3 settings. It's got basically a low and a high. I only ever use the low. High is way too high of a heat for what we're looking for with these powder paints. So if you're going to do that, if you're going to use a heat gun, minimal flame. If you're going to use an actual flame, like an alcohol candle, alcohol fueled candle, that's fine. Just make sure that it's a really low little flame. That's all that you'll ever need for these little bead heads. They're real small. They don't take long to heat up. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this on here shortly. It's going to get real hot. I have this affixed to my table. It's actually attached just below, just with a little piece of Velcro on the backing. So, and that's where it sits, just pointing straight up like this. Obviously, I just keep it here 24/7, and it's ready to go as part of my process, because I paint most, if not all, of my beads, my jigs and my beads. So there it is. The next step here is to grab the Okay, so the next step is to take the hook that you have prepared, and we're going to go ahead and take that with its little heat shrink wrap, and we're going to go ahead and heat shrink right now. Okay.
All right, so the next step here is we're going to take our hook that we have set up here with the bead head. We now have a heat shrink tubing around it. It's going to look like this here. And this is how I use my needle nose pliers. I just grab the back of the hook there, right at the bend. And that's how I'm going to hold it over here in just a moment. So let me fire this thing up. Okay, remember, low setting, middle is all you want. You'll know. That's what it sounds like on medium. There's high. Just keep it at medium and go ahead and back off for just a minute while it warms up. Okay, so the heat gun's probably about warm enough now. Just so you guys can all see, there's the hook right there. Let's see if I can get that in focus right about there. So right now it has a heat shrink wrap tubing on the eye of the hook. It is not ready. It'll blow off right now if I turn it upside down or fall off. So let's just get it prepared here. So I'm going to go ahead and bring it right over the top of the heat gun here. And just slowly kind of work the heat around. There we go. Getting the heat shrink tubing to constrict on the eye. So now, you can see, any better now? Now you can see that heat shrink tubing is definitely seated on there pretty nicely. All right, so the next step is we need to go ahead and heat our bead head up here. We need to prepare it for dipping into the powder paint. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and once again get the heat gun on our medium setting, our low setting, if you will. Okay. Now, once you get decent at this process, you can actually do this step in conjunction with the previous step, putting the heat shrink wrap tubing on the eye of the hook. When you heat this, you get the shrink wrap nice and heated. It's also heating the head, and then you would go ahead and dip in your powder paint, and good to go. If you want to not do this with anything that is glass, you don't want to do this with anything that's plastic, so those type of beads would be inappropriate for coating. This is only going to be for your metallic, your tungsten type bead heads only. Okay, so we're just going to get this superheated right here. Doesn't take long. Really, you only need about 3 or 4 seconds. You don't want to overheat because you'll notice with powder paints, if you overheat, when you dip this, it will immediately start to smoke. That means you cooked it too long. Better to err on the side of less is better. So 3 or 4 seconds is really all you need in this application. They heat fast, they cool fast. Usually I just blow on them to cool them down. This is all that's needed though. And now at this point, I'm going to go ahead and dunk this into our powder paint. Okay, one of the most important things you can do with these powder paints before you're ready to go ahead and apply this to anything is these need to be prepared properly. So pretty easy when they come in these small little tubs here. This is 2 ounce jar, or 2 ounces worth inside a jar. So basically the best way is to keep the lid on, shake these up really good, get these nice and mixed up before you go ahead and do anything. Give it a few taps here. Give it a few seconds in there. You'll let everything kind of settle. It's gonna be a nice and dusty storm in there right now. So just let everything settle, and then you're ready. In the meantime, let's go ahead and we'll prepare our heat gun once again on medium or low setting. So this is disco lime. This is a mixture of some chartreuse flake with some chartreuse colored powder Pro-Tec paint. It's actually really a cool color. All right, probably ready to go ahead and dunk here. So what we're going to do is, once again, I am heating my bead head. Only takes about 4 seconds or so. And then I'm just going to come down here and I'm just going to dip it in. Just get it swirled around in there. Okay, once again, back at the heat gun here. So after you've taken your bead head, you've swirled it in here, you're going to bring it right up here to the heat gun. Okay, get it nice. There's a point where there's too much heating going on. Try to stay about 3-4 inches away from the heat source. Okay, and only try to hit certain parts of the bead head as you're going around. Okay. Now sometimes you may need to do 2 coats. So in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and hit 2 coats. So I'm going to dip it back again, inside, swirl it around, give it a couple shakes, and let the heat do the rest. The back side nice and coated or heated as well on the coat. Now we're just letting it cool. Okay, so there is the completed hook. Unfortunately, we still have to go ahead and clear that eye of the hook you may need to go ahead and, depending on how well that is put on there, you can use your fingernail. Oftentimes I just grab it here and I'll just pull it right off. But if it is too hot or too stuck on there, you may need to go back to your heat gun here. Just give it just a second or two. Let it cool down, and then you can pull it right off that way. There we go. Okay, now you pull the eyelet off just like we just did. Now what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to run it through the heat one more time. And this kind of just smooths out the surface from the front there that was touching the heat shrink tubing. All right, so I've got the hook, the bead put back here onto the vise so you can see what it looks like at this point. So essentially the eye is clear. You probably can't really see that, but there's nothing impeding any line going through it. And we've got a painted custom bead head, and that's the whole key to this. You can set your flies apart a little differently by being a little more custom with what you put on to your bead head. Usually this is where I'm going to go ahead and leave mine. Nowadays, this is as far as I go with treating the head. The only thing that I'll do now is I'll make my fly, tie in all my different materials, and when I'm done, I'm going to go ahead and hit the head here with just a little bit of UV, usually the Solar Res Bone Dry. I'll go ahead and just put a little bit over the top of this, and that just gives it a little bit extra protection. You can also use Sally's Hard as Nails. You can just put that on there as well. That will toughen up that exterior coating. That being said, I used to do something differently. So what I used to do is I used to use a toaster oven, which is just off screen here in my fishing dojo. I would go ahead and throw this into an oven at basically 350 degrees, and I would cook it in there for about 20 minutes. That supposedly adds durability. In my testing, that's not the case. I think it actually does maybe look a little bit better when it goes through the oven. That kind of rounds everything out a little bit nicer. But I don't think to the point that any more than adding just another coat of UV Solar Res, the Bone Dry, right over this, I think is just as good. If not, easier. You're not having to deal with the toaster. You're not having to wait 20 minutes for your hook, and then of course you have to let it cool. What I suggest doing is throwing a little bit of a clear coat over this, whatever that clear coat is. It will add that same protection that the toaster oven does, if not more. And when you do get a nick, it's going to probably be in the resin or the Sally's Hard as Nails in a lacquer. It will be in that, not your paint down below, because this coat here is probably near impossible to fix once it gets a chip in it. You might be able to do little touch-ups, but that's not what this is intended for, especially when you have a bunch of other material on here. Good luck getting that on your heat gun without burning anything. So you have to be very careful about that. But for those of you that want to see, I'm going to go ahead and show you what I do to do the toaster method. The toaster method is just going to be here in just a sec. Okay, so now I'm over here at the toaster. So if you want to get yourself something like this, just a cheap little Black & Decker toaster, it's all you need. Something that can preferably go up to 400 degrees Fahrenheit, although you're probably not going to need 400. I typically have this set right at 350, just as the Pro-Tec powder paint instructions call for. So 350, and of course you're going to want to go ahead and put this in its bake mode. You get your different modes if you have broil or toast and all that. Just put it on bake. And of course you need a timer of some sort. It doesn't have to be on here, but you need to at least be able to time 20 minutes. So that's the very first thing you'll want, is to have that. Also, if you're going to have this near, like here, I have this on wood, just make sure that you have this placed on something like stone. I just got a little riser for it to keep it up off the wood nearby the desk here. A couple of things that you're going to want to do. First thing is coat. I've got this coated, this grill here, I've got completely coated in foil, as you can see here. Just go ahead and coat it in foil. That is really to collect any drippings. So we're not going to really have to worry about it a whole lot, but that's just kind of more of a preventative unless you want all the powder paint falling down onto your heating element down below. You don't want that. So really, that's kind of a safety measure. The next thing that we're going to do is, this is really easy to make. All this is a piece of foil that is folded up essentially enough times where you can fold it over kind of like in a triangular fashion like this. Okay, just going to be able to fold it over and stand it up in there like that. So just a big long piece of foil, just keep folding it over until you have something. This here is probably about 5 or 6 inches long. There we go, 5 or 6 inches long, and that's enough. That's plenty. Just you want something in here. This is going to be basically a little rack that you're going to have your hooks hanging off of. So I'll show you with our hook that we just created. I'll show you how to get these inserted into this little rack. So I have the hook here, okay, and what I do is I keep the little foil here folded over completely, just like that, just flat. Okay, so from the triangular position here, you're just going to go ahead and close it. Okay, you've got the open side on the bottom, and then of course there's the pointed side on the top, just like that. What you want to do is take the hook and pull it through the top portion where it doesn't open, the part that's the top, the peak, the pinnacle, right there. So you're going to want to take your hook and pull it right through both sides. So you want to see the hook come out the other side, okay? So the hook comes out the other side, and then you're going to angle it up. So what you're going to do is you're going to be able to do this with probably about a dozen or so at once. Okay, normally I'm not just going to put one single bead head in there. Usually I'm going to do 12 or so at a time, maybe 3 of each color, 3 of each color if I'm going with 4 colors, something like that. And then I will make mini beads to tie on at once. You probably can make even more of these and have 3 or 4 of them sitting in there all at once if you want to start mass producing these. But as a solo at home flyer, you're probably not going to need more than this. So now what you're going to want to do is take the foil here. You're going to have them all hanging preferably the same way, all the hooks pointed the same way. So just kind of thread the hooks in there all the same way. And then what you're going to do is you're going to open up the pamphlet here ever so slightly. When you do this step here, you'll notice it sets the hook in there so that it stands up. Okay, so right now the hook is basically standing in there. The further apart I pull this from each other, the better the hook stays in there. Of course, if I close it, it falls right over just as it did there. So the idea is to have a nice little spot for it to hang on to. Okay, so there, once again, and sometimes it takes a little, you have to take the hooks here and just kind of angle them backwards a little bit. That's fine. Just play with them. The idea is to have the hooks pointed upwards, just like this. So when you place this little stand with the hook inside your oven, they're going to be facing upwards. And there's a reason for that, because if you've ever placed these in here upside down, what happens is as it heats, the element heats the powder paint again, the powder paint is going to want to run in a certain direction, just a little bit, not a lot, but depending on how much powder paint you put on there, it will start to coagulate and move in a downward direction. Gravity's working there. So what I choose to do is have any of the paint angling back towards the bend in the hook, away from the head. If you do it and you have the powder paint flowing down towards the eye of the hook, well, guess where the powder paint is going to be going into? The eye of the hook. And if powder paint gets into the eye of the hook after it's gone through the oven, it's near impossible to get it removed out of the hook. I've tried. It's really a pain in the behind. So the best solution for that is just to not let it happen. So, and that's why there's this little stand here. Tried many different variations, and maybe you'll come up with one that's even better. But this one seems to do the trick. Okay, so that's going to go in there, and that's it. Close her up. Go ahead and put it on 20 minutes at 350, and we just let that sit in there just like that. At the end of the 20 minutes, I usually open up the door to the toaster, and that's how I let them cool. I just let them cool naturally. Give them a good 10-15 minutes of cool down time. They don't take long. Once it's cool enough to remove this out of there, you're done. You just pull all your hooks right out. The completed bead head will be on there as well, and that's it. That's all there is to the process.